Tracey Spicer. Welcome to 10's 5 o'clock news. Tonight, more violence in Melbourne. Protesters arrested and police injured as the G20 Summit wraps up. Superfish shock. Thorpe tipped to pull out of a major swimming trial.
That's the hardest thing that he's coming to terms with, that physically within himself, he's not at the level that he wants to be at.
Schoolies celebrations. A record crowd parties on the Gold Coast. Tom and Katie finally tie the knot in Italy, but their celebrity pals almost steal the show. And beating the drum for the planet, the high-profile Australians helping spread Al Gore's message on climate change. But first tonight, police in Melbourne have set up a task force to hunt down dozens of violent protesters who targeted the G20 Summit. 10 officers were injured and 11 demonstrators arrested as the clashes continued throughout the night. 10's Alan Rascal is in central Melbourne and he joins us now. Alan, more ugly scenes overnight, but the expected trouble didn't really eventuate today.
Tracey, what a difference a day makes. Yesterday, the streets of Melbourne descended into chaos and violence. Today, the barricades surrounding the hotel which hosted the G20 Summit remained, but the protesters were nowhere to be seen. Police sources tell me they were largely caught off guard yesterday, that the force seemingly swallowed protest organiser claims that the demonstrations would be peaceful. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. There were more violent overnight scuffles outside Victoria's State Parliament, resulting in a number of police being injured and several protesters arrested.
About 100 protesters picked up where they left off after a day of running street battles with police. The crowd erupted outside the Victorian Parliament, hurling bottles and abuse. Dozens of baton-wielding officers confronted the demonstrators, arresting 5.
And with independent media!
They formed a cordon around an abandoned vehicle in the middle of the street, where demonstrators had chained themselves to the wreck. They were cut free and arrested as officers dragged others away. It ended more than 12 hours of violence which stretched police to the limit. Constable Glenn Melder says he was beaten on the arm and chest. He's awaiting the results of an HIV test. The Victoria Police Chief says it's among the worst violence she's seen in 30 years of policing.
These people don't have morals and standards. They don't care what they do to police officers, and that's what we saw, and that's what we saw in the news.
G20 Summit Chairman Peter Costello didn't mince his words when describing the protesters.
We will not be giving over the streets of our cities to criminals.
Today, the uniformed presence was doubled as the summit wound up. After yesterday's violence, police were ordered to take a hard line with any troublemakers. Without the large crowds behind them, the protesters failed to materialise. 28-year-old Akim Sari was remanded in custody after a brief court appearance, accused of smashing a police van.
Get out, everyone! Police fire!
Gerard Cholton, 10 News.
Well, as Gerard just mentioned, the summit wrapped up this afternoon. Alan Rascal, what did it achieve?
Well, Tracey, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Of course, those involved are claiming great success when it comes to the key issue of securing world energy supplies, especially for growth countries like China and India. But the forum has been criticised for failing to make any commitment to aid for poorer countries.
The Treasurer has hailed the G20 meeting a success because it put global energy supply and demand at the top of the agenda. But more work needs to be done.
The emergence of countries like China and India is going to put immense pressure on energy and minerals. If they can't be assured of security, could create frictions.
For Australia, China is a key player on the energy front, hungry for our resources, the booming nation raising the prospect of buying our uranium during bilateral talks. Climate change was raised during discussions about secure energy supplies, the UK urging countries, including Australia, to act on the warnings of the Stern report.
The choice is to act pretty soon on the challenge of climate change, to make changes which are going to impose some costs.
The effectiveness of current aid programs to poor nations was only briefly discussed over the past 2 days. More detailed talks will have to wait until next year's summit. The delegates attacked for ignoring the thousands who die every day.
There is simply no way we can win the war on terror or the war against global warming if we don't deal with poverty.
Next year's summit will be held in South Africa. Nicole Strawn, 10 News.
And Tracey, Treasurer Peter Costello has been outraged by the protests, believing they could tarnish our international reputation. That prompted him to take time out this afternoon to thank police on the front line for their efforts and to apologise for what they've been through. But even as he did that, he was jeered by demonstrators. As for the summit's legacy, police say the street barricades will remain for as long as necessary. There's even talk that could mean until lunchtime tomorrow, which of course will cause all sorts of headaches for pedestrians and motorists in Melbourne's CBD for the beginning of the working week.
Thank you, Alan Raskell in Melbourne. And the Prime Minister has vowed hooligans won't be able to disrupt next year's APEC Summit of World Leaders in Australia. The pledge comes as this year's meeting in Vietnam draws to a peaceful conclusion.
Dressed to the nines, the 21 APEC leaders and their partners attend the gala banquet. The Howards and the Bushes arriving almost simultaneously. The Vietnamese Prime Minister personally clinking glasses with everybody. The harmony in the dinner hall just as evident in Hanoi's friendly streets.
In 2007, APEC returns to its birthplace.
The main venues for next year's event will be the Sydney Opera House, the Convention Centre and Government House. John Howard determined to replicate communist Vietnam's success.
I have every confidence in the capacity of the authorities to deal with any thuggish behaviour by unrepresentative hooligans at APEC.
Again in the summit retreat, the American and Australian leaders were side by side, backing the call for freer trade and cleaner coal technology. The Hanoi APEC has seen more evidence of the closeness between Iraq War allies John Howard and George Bush. And tonight in Ho Chi Minh City, the two leaders and their wives will have a private dinner. The third Iraq amigo, Britain's Tony Blair, won't be there. And he's broken ranks on the upbeat rhetoric of his partners on just how well things are going, agreeing it's a disaster.
So far it's been, pretty much of a disaster.
It has, but you see, what I say to people is...
Look, it's been tougher than I expected, but it's not a disaster when people, in the face of the most fearful physical intimidation, vote on 3 occasions to embrace democracy.
In Hanoi, Paul Bongiorno, 10 News.
The first group of Australians evacuated from Tonga will arrive in Sydney on a Defence Force flight tonight. Australian and New Zealand soldiers have secured the airport, but local troops are guarding the capital. Australian Federal Police have been allowed in to investigate arson attacks on Chinese-owned shops in the capital, which claimed 8 lives. 80% of businesses were destroyed during 2 days of rioting. Pro-democracy leaders are calling for the immediate resignation of the Prime Minister, warning violence could flare again. Ian Thorpe looks set to pull out of next month's selection trials for the World Swimming Championships. His coaching team fronted the media today, confirming the 5-time Olympic champion is still plagued by illness and injury.
Trials for the World Swimming As far as your health, you know yourself, if you're not 100%, it's very hard to stand up and do what you have to do day in and day out. And I think that's the hardest thing that he's coming to terms with, that physically within himself, he's not at the level that he wants to be at.
If he misses the Brisbane trials, he won't be able to compete in next year's World Championships in Melbourne. The 24-year-old hasn't competed at an international meet since the 2004 Olympics. Thorpe is expected to make an announcement about his future on Tuesday. Hollywood stars Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes have married in a Scientology ceremony at a castle outside Rome. But because the religion isn't recognised in Italy, the couple was forced to hold a second civil service to make it legal.
The celebrity relationship that exploded into the news ended its biggest night in fireworks. The only surprise, perhaps, Tom Cruise wed Katie Holmes away from the cameras. Deep behind the walls of a candlelit medieval castle, they shared their nuptials with baby Suri and just 200 guests, who earlier did what they could to entertain the world's media.
Dance with the bride tonight. We haven't made any of those plans yet. We'll see.
I hope that they're able, amidst all of it, to just look at each other and feel thrilled and happy and peaceful.
Paparazzi Queen Victoria Beckham looked a little desperate and dateless. Hubby David missed the wedding, ordered home to train with his Spanish soccer team. For the the hundreds of locals who waited in the rain all day and night, only a lucky few saw this, the groom waving from the backseat of a dark car as he arrived at the castle. And some brief glimpses of his 27-year-old sweetheart before she changed into her Giorgio Armani strapless cream gown covered in crystals. Her underwear alone said to cost $3,000. Now, only one thing's for certain, the bidding war over first photos of their $1.2 million extravaganza will make it all seem like money well spent. Ali Donaldson, 10 News.
A major backburn to contain a bushfire that's destroyed hundreds of hectares west of Sydney. That's next. And the Aussie tourists flocking to New Zealand's coolest new attraction.
But I've actually come all the way from Perth to experience this.
Firefighters are battling to control bushfires west of Sydney before worsening conditions on Tuesday. 300 firefighters completed an extensive backburning operation overnight in a bid to avert the threat. While no homes are currently at risk, the Rural Fire Service fears this may change when strong northwesterly winds sweep through the region early next week. A 20-kilometre containment line has been put in place and 14 water-bombing aircraft are working to combat the flames. Well, leadership tension is again threatening to derail the Federal Labor Party. Kim Beazley's under pressure over his performance, but Shadow Treasurer Wayne Swan says his leader isn't going anywhere.
If Kim Beazley's leadership is under threat, no one is saying so publicly. Shadow Treasurer Wayne Swan says Mr Beazley will take Labor into next year's election and win.
I don't intend to give any credibility to what I regard as media speculation that's got no real basis in fact.
Leadership speculation intensified after a Labor slump in the polls and then this gaffe.
Today our thoughts and the thoughts of many, many Australians will be with Karl Rove.
He meant to say Rove McManus, whose wife Belinda Emmett was farewelled on Friday. In the words of one Labor MP, it reinforced the problem in everyone's mind. Only a small minority believe Mr Beazley can win an election. Some want Kevin Rudd to replace him.
He's obviously canvassing for it, everybody knows that.
No one thinks there'll be a challenge to Kim Beazley before the next election. Labor MPs are simply too traumatised after the Mark Latham mess. But those who want change hope Mr Beazley will simply step aside. Others, though, say it would be madness to change leaders now.
There's no room for ongoing speculation about leadership. This is our best chance, in my view, in the last 3 or 4 elections to win.
We've got this government under pressure when it comes to climate change.
But do they? An Ipsos Mackay poll has found only 19% of voters believe Labor would best manage climate change, less than the Coalition and the Greens. Laurel Irving, 10 News.
A record crowd has enjoyed the annual Schoolies celebrations on the Gold Coast, organisers praising the behaviour of school leavers, but frustrated by the antics of older party crashers.
It was the greatest teenage tide that the Gold Coast had ever seen. 26,000 schoolies turned Surfers Paradise into one big celebration.
Record numbers, all our event partners are saying that was the biggest schoolies on record.
And didn't they enjoy it?
It's safe, it's fun, and we're having so many people here. It's so awesome. We deserve this.
Remarkably, only 12 were arrested, mainly for public nuisance, and more than 110 fines were issued for drinking in public. It was the toolies, the older non-school leavers, that kept police busy. A 25-year-old man was arrested for drug possession, one of 70 taken into custody.
Primarily disorderly conduct or public nuisance. However, there were 4 arrested for possessing weapons, and those weapons were knives.
But most were oblivious to the problems, and for those who went too hard too early, help was never far away.
I'm not too drunk, don't worry. I'm still a virgin.
While some got written off, others were written on. Another falling over himself to catch up with an old friend.
Come on, I've seen him for like 2 years at least.
Hello.
And I mean, again.
It was here on the beach and in the sun where most of them came to relax and revive today before heading out again tonight to do it all over again. Andrew Lay, 10 News.
Australians are flocking to New Zealand's coolest tourist attraction. 2 giant icebergs floating close to the mainland are attracting a stream of visitors on helicopters and boats.
I can't believe that I've actually come all the way from Perth to experience this.
The bergs are gradually breaking up in the warmer waters off the coast, but helicopter pilots have spotted 2 more on the horizon drifting north. 4 people injured when a shop awning bearing a giant Santa collapses. That's next. Also, the music star beating the drum for the environment, Al Gore's Aussie climate messengers.
It's one about the planet, and I think in that sense it takes a shift in thinking, and it also takes everyone to be involved in it as well.
4 people have been taken to hospital after an attempt to put up Christmas decorations went dangerously wrong. The volunteers from a local Lions club were putting up a giant Santa on top of a shop in Sydney's south when the awning of the building collapsed.
It felt like a bomb was going off, essentially, but when I looked out I could see the front of the building collapsing, and I was a bit scared that the windows were going to come craving in as well.
No one was seriously injured. Police and work cover are investigating. Police are looking into a suspicious death in Sydney's northwest. The body of a 20-year-old man was discovered lying in a suburban street last night. The cause of the death was unclear, but police say he'd suffered a facial injury. Homicide detectives and forensic officers are examining the scene. Police are appealing for information. A young woman has been killed in an apparent hit-run on the Gold Coast. Her body was discovered on the side of the Gold Coast Highway at Surfers Paradise around 1:30 this morning. Police also recovered pieces of plastic from a broken car indicator light.
They'll be looking at skid marks that are left on the road and other indicators to try and figure out exactly what's happened, which will include the speed of the vehicle.
Police say the victim was aged in her 20s. Outrage over revelations a convicted sex killer was prescribed a Viagra-type drug while behind bars in South Australia. It's alleged Bevan Spencer Von Eyman then raped a fellow inmate.
Bevan Spencer Von Eyman is a ruthless killer, jailed for life in 1983 for brutally raping, mutilating and murdering 15-year-old Richard Kelvin. Now, 2 years before he's eligible for parole, it's been revealed a prison doctor prescribed him a Viagra-like drug called Cialis for 3 months in 2003.
That it would go to such an appalling criminal who's involved in the most terrifying sex crimes in South Australia, it just absolutely sickens me.
A fellow inmate exposed the controversy in a statement to police, alleging Von Eyman used the drug to repeatedly rape him.
It can only be used for one purpose, and given that man's record, you can only assume what he wanted it for.
Another prisoner was given similar drugs in 2001. Further prescriptions of impotence drugs have been permanently banned, and Von Eyman's doctor stood down until a government inquiry is complete. Today's revelation adds to a growing list of questionable treatment given to Von Eyman here at Yatala Prison. The government is already investigating claims he was fed bacon and eggs for years, allowed to sell paintings to prison officers, and even used a mobile phone. While 61-year-old Von Eyman is eligible for parole in 2008, Premier Mike Rann has vowed never to allow his release. Alex Hart, 10 News.
Former US Vice President Al Gore has started personally grooming a new breed of environmental warriors in Australia. Actors, entertainers, business and community leaders all volunteering to help tackle climate change.
Felix Riebel knows how to command the attention of an audience, but for his next round of gigs, there'll be a distinct change of tune. The 24-year-old frontman of the Cat Empire is set to beat the drum for the environment.
I suppose being a musician and being someone who's aware of their surroundings and who really enjoys their surroundings so much, a project like this and taking on a cause like this is imperative.
And not just any cause, the Melbourne entertainer is being personally trained to belt out the global warming message by former US Vice President Al Gore.
The whole purpose of this is to try to get the message about the climate crisis delivered more quickly to more people.
Sydney GP Dr Michael C also taking time out from his day job to press the need for an urgent reduction in greenhouse gases. As a father, he believes it's the greatest gift he can give his children.
That's much more important than
giving up some of my time, giving up some of the earning possibilities. I think that's not an issue to me at this stage.
I think this is an issue that concerns absolutely everyone, and it's one that sort of goes beyond old ideas of environmental issues. It's one about the planet, and I think in that sense it takes a shift in thinking, and it also takes everyone to be involved in it as well.
Felix also hopes to set up a cyber recycling program using personal items donated by celebrities to raise money for sustainability projects. Charmaine Dragoon, 10 News.
The weather's next, then it's Sports Tonight with Neil Cordy. And Neil, a spectacular finish at the Australian Open Golf.
Yes, Tracy, it was a thriller. A host of players in contention right up to the final holes. Australia's galaxy of golf stars shining at the National Open.
He's done it. John Senden has now set the bar.
Plus the Kangaroos send Great Britain out of the Tri-Nations.
Let's take a quick look at tomorrow's weather details. It should be windy with showers in Cairns, sunny in Brisbane, mostly sunny on the Gold and Sunshine coasts. A mostly sunny day in Sydney, mostly cloudy in Canberra, late thunder for Melbourne and a late shower in Hobart. To South Australia, showers in Adelaide and Victor Harbour, mostly cloudy in Port Lincoln. And that brings you up to date with the latest news. Thanks for joining us. Stay around now for Sports Tonight with Neil Cordy. I'm Tracey Spicer. Good night.